Welcome back, WNST Takeovers. I had my first cookies of the holidays on Saturday afternoon. It's a weird week, Luke Jones. It's always weird. No one knows what day's Monday, what day's Sunday. There's football on, there's bowl games, but certainly for the Ravens and the Colts, it all was about 4:30, getting it all out of the way before the holiday really got going. And I've called it sort of a scary endeavor. I sat with you in the second half when the rain subsided and the game got close and Sam Cook got blocked. And all I could think about is, I hope that this is the way it doesn't go down. I hope John Harbaugh's not getting fired over this. I hope they're not busting the organization up over this, because it would have been catastrophic had somehow, some way, they squandered that lead and lost the football game.
Yeah, I mean, you lose to a 3-win team and make them a 4-win team in Week 16 when you're at home and your playoff fate is in your own hands and all you have to do is win and you don't, then that's the kind of loss that can change everything. That's the kind of loss that all bets are off because you don't know how Steve Bisciotti's going to react to that. So it was definitely a scary game. I'd say it was an ugly game in many ways. Certainly not a performance that was going to help the eyeball test. But let's face it, you're playing a 3-win team, lousy weather conditions. That doesn't really set up to have one of those eyeball test games where you get a bunch of style points and you blow a team out and everyone's going to say you're for real, because frankly, you blow a team out like that, then people say, well, that team stinks anyway, so who cares? And if you lose a close game, people are going to be down on you for that. But the only thing that can't happen, and fortunately the Ravens made enough plays at the very end of the game to prevent that from happening, is you can't lose. So it wasn't an aesthetically pleasing game. I think there's plenty to pick apart, but and I think one thing that I really took away from the post-game locker room, the Ravens acknowledged that they didn't play a particularly strong game, and they needed to do things a lot better than they did. And I think they understand that even with the Cincinnati Bengals, who long ago had their season come to an end, the Ravens know the history here. They know the Bengals have given them plenty of headaches over the last 3 or 4 years specifically. Ravens know they need to play a much more crisp brand of football if they're going to beat the Bengals and completely assure themselves of a playoff spot and not have to worry about any other scenarios.
Luke Jones joining us here. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Happy holidays to everybody out there. Need to remind you about Freedmont Mortgage. If you're in the market in 2018 to buy, sell, or just make a decision on your home or where you are and see where you are versus the marketplace, Freedmont Mortgage has your answers at Freedmont.com. Big sponsors of our There Goes My Hero events as well. D&O Window Tinting, 26 years of tinting everything, including out on these snowy days when it gets bright out there. The cars, the boats, the businesses. They've been doing it forever, as long as we've been doing sports radio here. They put the shades on the sun. They take away the squint. They are D&L Window Tinting there in Parkville and White Marsh. Luke, the one thing that sort of jumps out for me, and look, we'll pick the game apart because that's what we're going to do here for the next week. You get an extra day and a holiday thrown in there and sort of walk in the tight wire as to winning or losing. If they win this week, they're in. We all know that. But the one thing that concerns me for them is that T.Y. Hilton got loose again, right? And the tight ends get loose against this defense. And it felt to me like, it was Christmas time and Eric Weddle had a white beard, and I asked him, hey, you guys gave up some yards. Well, 300, but I don't want to talk about that. Well, I'll tell you what, the other teams' receivers, this was a problem last year after Jimmy Smith no longer existed, and here we go again where the other team always seems to have one guy that can run around and do damage to you at the wrong time. And that maybe it scares me about A.J. Green or it scares me about the Bengals, but it certainly scares me about whomever they see, whether it's the Chargers, whether it's the Jaguars. At any point, that's something that I take out of the game to say, all right, you figured it out without Marshall Yanda 10 weeks, 12 weeks later, that you might be able to go and play a game against the New England Patriots defense or play a game as they did 2 weeks ago against the Pittsburgh Steelers, because those are the teams that are in front of you. I mean, dude, they're 9-6. If we're not going to talk about the Super Bowl here, why are we here? You know what I mean? Like, literally, can they win games in January? Stopping wide receivers is going to be a big part of that unless they play all these games in the snow.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, but I kind of look at two other factors more so than, picking apart, whether it's Brandon Carr, Marlon Humphrey, Maurice Kennedy. And keep in mind, T.Y. Hilton's a pretty good receiver, too. Now, the numbers haven't jumped off the page because Jacoby Brissett has been his quarterback all year, and Andrew Luck, of course, hasn't played. But I look at two other factors. One, the Ravens didn't get any level of consistent pressure on Jacoby Brissett against an offensive line that had placed its starting center on IR earlier in the week, that had deactivated their starting right tackle, and wasn't a good offensive line to begin with. I mean, the Colts, entering Week 16, had allowed more sacks than any team in the NFL, and the Ravens just, and it's not as though they didn't try to blitz, they just didn't get home. So you had that, and then you had the fact that the Ravens didn't force any turnovers. And we've seen it all year. I mean, this team entered Week 16 first in the NFL in takeaways, first in interceptions. But we've seen on the occasions where they haven't been able to make those splash plays, and keep in mind, they had chances to do it on Saturday night. C.J. Mosley dropped one, Eric Weddle dropped one. There were opportunities to be had there. But when they don't make those plays, this defense feels pretty darn ordinary then. And, you know, that's part of their MO. They're not necessarily a team that's going to just dominate you like the 2000 Ravens. They're going to try to create turnovers and make splash plays and try to flip field position and do things like that.
But that's what the playoffs are about. That's how they won in 2000 with Anthony Mitchell and Ray Lewis taking the ball away. And, dude, for all that we'll sit here, and look, I'm not going to complain about the victory. I'm really not. I mean, I'm not shocked that it went the way it did. I'm not shocked that it was close. I'm not shocked that they weren't lucky, because they've been lucky plenty of the time. But if Weddle comes down with that ball or CJ comes down to that ball, you know, it's a different. We're not talking about a nervous victory, because that is and obviously the Sam Cook thing. I mean, that's sort of a breakdown. If that happens against the Chargers or the Chiefs or the whomever in 2 weeks, they're going to lose. You know, I mean, that's not going to play well in Kansas City or Jacksonville against that defense down there on a 68-degree day in January. So I'm with you. When those opportunities present themselves and you get a pass rush, even if it's late in the game, and you finally get that one ball up in the air, you got to come down with the ball.
You have to, and I mean that's just going to be the difference in January. I mean, look at the Ravens. As much as you look at the Mile High Miracle, they were able to pick off Peyton Manning a couple times in that game, and you know they've been able to force Tom Brady to make mistakes, and you know they did it against Roethlisberger in 2014. I mean, you have to make those plays, and when you don't make those plays, you leave yourself a smaller margin for error, and then something weird happens, like the block punt. I mean, these special teams have been superb all year. That's not something I'm necessarily going to freak out about, unless it happens again against Cincinnati and you almost lose because of that. You know, but it's certainly, this team is 9-6 because of its turnover ratio, because of the fact that they've created so many turnovers and put their offense on a short field.
Yeah, it hasn't been their dynamic offense.
yeah. I mean, their offense has played better, certainly. We'll get into that in the next few moments, I'm sure. But that offense, they haven't turned the ball over a whole lot. And when you create turnovers and you don't give the ball away, that's going to be good enough against most teams. Now, you got to make plays when you're facing the cream of the crop, and that's the biggest question that will face this team. I mean, let's face it, they haven't exactly had a tough schedule here. I mean, you look at their strength of victory, it's one of the worst percentages in the AFC. They've certainly benefited from playing a less than stellar schedule, and they've certainly benefited from playing a lot of backup quarterbacks. Now, they shouldn't apologize for that. They can't control that, but it does make it very fair to ask, to wonder, to doubt whether this team's going to rise to the occasion. But if they are going to rise, it's going to be because they create turnovers in the postseason. And you know, the biggest thing about Saturday, I wasn't surprised to see T.Y. Hilton have 100 yards. Like I said, he's a very capable Pro Bowl kind of a receiver who doesn't have great numbers this year, but we know the circumstances that have plagued Indianapolis and are probably going to cost Chuck Pagano his job, unfortunately. But I was really surprised to see them not get to Brissett. I mean, just hardly at all. I mean, it was very rare. I mean, they got the sack on the final drive, and that was good to see. But that was something that I did not expect to happen. And in this day and age, you can talk about having Jimmy Smith or not in the back end. I mean, I think Marlon Humphreys played very well. Sure, you'd love in a perfect world to have Smith and Humphrey as your starters, maybe Brandon Carr.
And Tavon Young, and we can go down the line. The way the team was constructed, at this point at 9-6, it's a damn shame that all these guys got hurt the way they did, because they might have been a 12. They might have been pretty good this year if Yonda was there, and Smith was there, and Pitta was there. You know what I mean? Like, if all of that concoction back in March and April were there, this wouldn't have been a bad football team.
Well, I mean, it's not a bad football team anyway.
Correct.
But at the same time, injuries are going to happen. I mean, you can plan all you want. You're not going to have a completely healthy roster. I mean, Pittsburgh went through the first, 13 weeks of the season and didn't have any injuries at all. And then you saw what happened with Ryan Shazier, unfortunately. Antonio Brown's out into the playoffs. That Joe Hayden got hurt. I mean, so, and there was an example of a team that hadn't been bitten by the injury bug. So, I mean, that's reality. But my point is, you can have all those guys in the back end of your defense, but in this day and age in the NFL, if you're not going to pressure a quarterback and move him from his spot and make him uncomfortable and force his throws to be off and to pick up some sacks, you're not going to have a great pass defense. So the Ravens' pass defense overall has been quite good this year, with a couple lousy performances notwithstanding. Of course, the Pittsburgh game jumps out immediately. But, it's hard to ignore how up and down the defense has been since the Jimmy Smith injury. Even go back to the second half of the Detroit game where Matthew Stafford picked them apart and scored 20 points in the second half. So, it's a fair question. And I think you look at this defense, the numbers look really good. I know some of the analytics sites love this defense, but at the same time, you do acknowledge that, hey, it's one thing to pick off DeShone Kizer and to hold Jacoby Brissett to one touchdown and beat up on Brett Hundley and guys like that. But in the playoffs, okay, well, we'll laugh about Blake Bortles, but he's quietly played some pretty good football lately. Alex Smith is someone who's been there, even if he hasn't been to the top. And that Roethlisberger and Tom Brady are looming. So this isn't a case where you're going to go to the playoffs and you're going to be facing the same kind of quarterback. So I think you have to look at this defensive performance. While I think I've seen some people say it was terrible, that might be a little over the top. I mean, they gave up 16 points. Let's take a deep breath. Now that
it wasn't good enough.
They certainly had they had issues. There's no doubt about that, and there were certain things that happened in that football game that, had they been playing a better offense, they would have been in some serious trouble, no question.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of our programming brought to you by King Discount Liquors. Give the King a ring. It's New Year's week. It's a party. It's a celebration. Lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. I am fresh out of Malbec. I got to get over to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Also brought to you by our friends at Al's Seafood down in Essex. We lost Big Al last week, a bone marrow transplant survivor. Survived 3 decades after his bone marrow transplant. Friends and family gathered last week to remember Big Al. I want to give a shout out to Chad the Crab Man. I've been getting my crabs and crab since I was a little boy. I knew Mr. Al at the Eastwood Little League. They are the oldest crab house in Baltimore. They're still at Stemmers Run and at Eastern. Give them some love. Go by. Give Chad a hug over there at Al's Seafood in Essex, where we lost Big Al last week. Luke, offensively, and where Flacco is and where the offense is running the football, and a little bit more of Buck Allen, and obviously it was a field goal game, and quite frankly, I like seeing Justin Tucker kick a couple of field goals and stretch himself out on a windy night and see where we are and all that. It feels like he's sort of the MVP of the team that hasn't been the MVP this year, because they haven't really called on him a ton the way we did, let's say, in Denver 4.5, 5 years ago to win games. But that's coming soon. If they're going to beat the Patriots, if they're going to beat the Steelers, if they're going to steal a game in Kansas City or Jacksonville, if they're going to beat Cincinnati on a cold day a week from now, I would think that we're getting into the point we're having the best kicker, and more than that, a maligned non-Pro Bowl kicker at this point, and the wake-up call of having a punt block that, I would expect this to be a major wake-up call to Rosberg and the Wolfpack for the coming weeks, because they're going to win football games, or probably, it's going to be a tightrope. It's going to be a 3-point game one way or another, and this offense is going to break down at the 18-yard line, because that's what they do. And when they do that, they need to hit field goals.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say this, though. If they break down too much inside the red zone, they're not going to win games.
Perfect.
You don't win games by kicking field goals. Now, you certainly want to have the best kicker in the league if you are down by 1 point and need a 52-yarder with 15 seconds ago. My point is, over the course of the game, you got to score more touchdowns. I'll be totally honest. I continue to be cautiously optimistic about this offense. This was another solid performance. Now, they didn't finish off drives, and that's one thing that Joe Flacco lamented in the post-game locker room.
At least they had drives.
Yeah, but that's the thing. They had 5 different 10-play drives. I mean, my goodness, let's think back to September and October and even the first half of November.
Oh, it's not hard for me to go back to Wembley and see what the hell was happening then, right?
This offense was not functional for large stretches
and
of the
Flacco
first
was
3
getting
months
killed,
of the season.
on top of all of that.
I mean, they weren't doing anything. I mean, they were struggling to kick field goals even. So I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing, and more specifically, I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing from Joe Flacco. And you know me, I haven't been someone that's sugarcoated it. I thought, the first 2.5, 3 months of this season, there were times where I was kind of wondering, what exactly is Flacco bringing to the table right now? Because he doesn't look good. I understand there's a lot of stuff working against him. I understand the health in the back of your mind has to be a concern, but he didn't look good.
Well, he didn't have a training camp, literally.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, all those factors. But you look at what he's done over the last 4 weeks. 237 or more yards passing in 4 straight games. He did that a total of once in the first 11 games of the season. Passer rating's been up, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception over that stretch. This isn't the best stretch of his career, but I'll tell you what it does remind me of. It reminds me a lot more of the Joe Flacco that we saw over the first 7 years of his career when he helped guide this team to 6 playoff appearances. Hasn't been unbelievable, but he's making more throws downfield. He's protecting the football. Keep in mind, early in the season, he wasn't making throws down the field, and he was turning the football over. I mean, that's a pretty deadly combination. I don't care who the quarterback is or what your track record is. We're seeing a better version of Joe Flacco. And I'll say this much. The last 2 weeks with Jeremy Maclin getting hurt on, the 4th play of the game, 5th play of the game against Cleveland, he played the last 2 weeks with one legitimate, established NFL wide receiver in Mike Wallace, who, by the way, is playing pretty darn well since the bye week.
And by the way, Moore and Campanaro and these guys, they've been okay too, for the most part.
They've been okay, but my point is he threw touchdowns to Michael Campanaro and Max Williams, 2 individuals who neither of them had caught a touchdown pass in over 2 years. So that just tells you what Flacco is doing, making it work with, we're being kind to
a Tom Brady cast.
a less than ideal supporting cast. We know the deal with the offensive line, though that group has played much better as the season has gone on. We know that this isn't a very talented group of wide receivers. You have a bunch of guys that are either young, never will be, Jeremy Maclin, many people would classify him as a has-been. I mean, it hasn't been a great group. I mean, it's been Mike Wallace, and, they've gotten some decent contributions from Benjamin Watson.
10 guys caught balls, 10.
Yeah, I mean, so my point is not that it's been outstanding, but this offense has been much better. Now, they need to finish off drives. I hear what you say about Justin Tucker. You love having Justin Tucker if you're going to kick field goals, but the name of the game when you get to January is you got to score touchdowns. And we've seen that in the past with the Ravens going to New England where you got to put some touchdowns on the board. We've seen that going up against Pittsburgh. We're talking about offenses that can score points, and you can't go on the road, which is where they're going to be in January, assuming they take care of business next Sunday. You can't go on the road and expect to win 16-13 against offenses like that. Now, maybe a meeting with Jacksonville, that might be different because you're talking about 2 teams that profile with their defense being their biggest strength. But I am encouraged by what I'm seeing from Joe Flacco, and as much as there was a lot of ugliness from Saturday night's game, the rock-solid performance that he turned in, that gives me some hope that trend is continuing. And, it's been 4 weeks in a row now where we've seen a good version of Joe Flacco. It hasn't been necessarily fantastic, but it's been much better than we saw over the first 11 weeks of the season.
Good enough to instill confidence for January. In that he's played, mistake-free football. Now, that being said, sailing a ball over Boyle's head, and, coming back and scoring. Joe understands that. I mean, Joe's the smartest guy in the room, and I think Joe's building some confidence. He looks like a more confident football player out there right now, and that should be celebrated because, as we've pointed out many times, I mean, getting on a plane and going out to Kansas City in January, Joe's not going to be the one with the yellow puddle between his legs.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to this. That Joe Flacco playing at this level that he's played over the last 4 weeks doesn't guarantee the Ravens are going to make a deep run into January. But I will guarantee you that if he reverts to what we saw over the first 11 games, they won't be making a run. So it gives you some hope. It gives you some wiggle room to envision them making a run. Now, does he get on the kind of roll that he did in 2012? I don't know. I mean, that was historic. I think it'd be really tough to ask anyone to duplicate that kind of a playoff run, but can he continue to play at a higher level and maybe hit one more level a little bit higher than where he's been the last 4 weeks? Maybe. It's tougher to envision it because he doesn't have an Anquan Bolden. He doesn't have a Dennis Pitta. He doesn't even have a Steve Smith, quite frankly, right now, but he's finding a way to make it work. And, if they can get their running game back on track, running game wasn't all that special against Indy, especially in the fourth quarter. That didn't do a whole lot to help protect the lead. But the running game plays more like it has over the course of the full season. They get this kind of play from Flacco, and their defense, gets up on the right side of the bed and forces 2 or 3 turnovers. Then that's the kind of formula that you could see this team getting to the AFC Championship, and then you roll the dice.
Wouldn't that be nice to be talking football 2-3 weeks from now? I mean, knowing that we're getting toward the end, and I got to be honest with you, when that punt got blocked and I was sitting next to you, I'm like, man, this would so suck if we're not playing football 2 weeks from now at this point. It's sort of the same emotion I had in Pittsburgh with you 2 weeks ago when I walked down into the locker room really kind of pissed off that they lost, because I'm like, don't cheat yourself out of a chance to go to Jacksonville and Kansas City. And, dude, if they go get their asses whipped by Jacksonville or lose by a field goal in Kansas City, I'm not going to cry the blues because I don't think they're Super Bowl worthy. But don't tease me like this. Don't have a 10-point lead over the Colts late in the game and somehow find a way to screw it up. Against the Colts on Christmas Eve, for crying out loud.
Yeah, don't lose at home to one of the worst teams in the NFL. I mean, my goodness.
Don't let your ship go down like that.
You mentioned the Pittsburgh game a couple weeks ago. The game that I was reminded of on Saturday was last year against Philadelphia. An Eagles team, Carson Wentz, who of course blew up this year, was having an MVP caliber, or at least in the strong discussion kind of season in his second year, but was a rookie quarterback, had kind of been up and down. Remember, got off to a good start last year, but it kind of faded a little bit after that. And, the Eagles gave the Ravens everything they could handle. And, I was even thinking, if Indy scores after the blocked punt, would they go for 2? Would they dare go for 2 like the Eagles did? And
Flacco said after the game, I knew they were going to go for 2. You elbowed me right away. You're out on Twitter. I mean, I guess that would have been the all or nothing way. We weren't going to sit there all night and play football, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made that they were moving the ball as well as they had been moving the ball really throughout the game. I mean, they didn't do well inside the red zone, of course, but they moved the ball pretty consistently up and down the field. Maybe you take your chances in overtime, but hey, you're a 3-win team. What do you have to lose? So that's the game. I really thought a lot about that Philadelphia game last year, which was Week 15, the week before the Pittsburgh game. That's the game that kept just coming to mind as I was watching that. But hey, they got it done. It wasn't pretty. How many times have we said that about a Ravens win? Even going back to the best years under John Harbaugh. Not exactly a team that wins pretty all that often. So they have to play better. I think you liked hearing the fact that they acknowledged that. They weren't cavalier about it. They weren't complacent about it. They flat out said, hey, no, we need to play better. And Terrell Suggs said that. Joe Flacco said that. John Harbaugh said that. I mean, just run the list of players, young and old. They have to play better against Cincinnati, who, as much as the Bengals have had some complete mail-in performances over the last month or so, that they would certainly like to try to end the Ravens season and put them behind the 8 ball and desperate for scoreboard watching help But they got to play better because that's a Bengals team that they've disappointed immensely this year. But we know that they've given the Ravens a lot of problems, including in Baltimore over the last few years, and not too many teams can say that. So Ravens need to play better next week.
Yeah, there's nothing automatic about this week. I mean,
No.
I'm not going down there just thinking, well, mail it in. I mean, we've seen them play against Indianapolis. We've seen, we've seen them lose to the Bears. So I don't think – I'll say this. Harbaugh's a hell of a football coach at this point, right? To turn this thing from 4-5 into this, and we were dreaming weeks ago that if they could hold serve, if they could win the games they needed to win, if they could go to Pittsburgh and be representative, if they could stay healthy – they've answered the bell. They really have. I mean, because they're not very good. They're not Super Bowl worthy. The offense was awful. They've been through all these injuries. They've had all these things go wrong, and yet we're waking up here on Christmas Day opening up presents, and part of it is they got to go beat a bad football team, sort of a lame duck football team at home next week, and they're going to be playing in January with the opportunity to win and play. I mean, we haven't had that so much around here that we should take it for granted. I mean, we're not the New England Patriots or the Indianapolis Colts of Peyton Manning. We don't make the playoffs every year around here. It should be a big deal. And I know I wrote last week about the fans, and certainly third down was different this week, but the empty stadium really does sort of damper things a little bit, right? I mean, you can sense the enthusiasm's down, even though there's no reason to not be optimistic that this team could be playing 2 or 3 weeks from now.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, obviously Dick Cass sent out the letter this week. I mean, I actually thought there would be a decent crowd until I saw what the weather forecast was. And let's face it, I mean, it's one thing for you and me to be sitting in the press box and seeing the rain and wind blow and everything. It's another thing if you got people that are getting ready for the holidays and stuff like that. I'm not saying I like it, but
it looked like a hurricane on TV, though.
Right. I mean, to point the finger at any one individual and say, "Hey, why weren't you at the game?" I'm sitting in the press box, so I'm not going to be that guy. But at the same time, getting back to your point as far as the Ravens, do I think that this team right now looks like they're poised to make a deep run in January? I'd be lying if I said I thought that was going to happen. But that said, they got the job done on Saturday night. They made the plays that they needed to at the very end after really giving everyone a scare. And now they're one victory away from an opportunity to roll the dice. Buck Showalter says it all the time in baseball. You get into October, in the case of football now we're talking January, and you roll the dice. You see if you get hot. You see if you get the right matchup. You see if the other team wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. And the thing that I wrote about at WNST.net with Joe Flacco playing his best football of the season now, and we know all about the track record in January, I think the Ravens will take their chances. Doesn't mean they're going to be a favorite. Doesn't mean that anyone's going to be pointing to them as the team that is the most dangerous necessarily or anything like that, although they have some experience. They have some that playoff savvy from the past. But, hey, they've won 5 of their last 6. Hasn't been against the greatest opponents, but they've taken care of business, and they've got themselves in position now, and we'll see what happens. What makes it fun is that they actually play the games, just like we saw Saturday when so many people were expecting a blowout, and you saw how that turned out. So anything can happen. Doesn't mean that they're the favorites, but, hey, sure beats playing out the string and being Cincinnati or being Indianapolis or being Cleveland right now and having nothing to play for whatsoever.
Yeah, it sucked to be a Packers fan freezing your ass off on Saturday night. I certainly fell for that, as well as everybody around the league. And we're now into the point in the season where all the hirings and firings are going to happen this week. We have Marvin coming in this week, Chuck last week. I'm watching Rex Ryan on TV. Billick's calling in here once a week and doing our partnership on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation. We're passing the torch around here, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, certainly plenty, and one day John Harbaugh will be part of that group. But I think you have to give the head coach credit. This team's got its issues, and I think this team's got issues that they'll still need to address whenever this season comes to an end. But considering where they were back in early October, coming off of just 2 curb stompings from Jacksonville and Pittsburgh, I think being 9-6, clinching their first winning record since 2014.
I couldn't have convinced you of this on the plane on the way home from Wembley, right?
I would have been quite skeptical of that. I would have thought at that point, probably a team that, even if they would stabilize themselves a little bit, not sure I would have seen more than 7 or 8 wins, for the to totality of the season.
Offense looked like garbage. Quarterback looked like garbage. Offensive line looked like garbage. Wide receivers looked non-existent. Brandon Williams was hurt.
Other than that, everything was great.
And we were losing 41-0.
Yeah.
And 25% of the fan base had decided to cancel their fandom that day. So other than that, it's just been it's been swimming. But since that moment, they have put the oars in the water and rowed the boat and chopped the wood and every other stupid sports analogy you could find, and put themselves in a position here to make it a very happy Festivus. So on that note, Luke, we will at some point convene to talk about Manny Machado
yeah.
and the Orioles and the Redskins' misery and anything else that happens. We'll have Terp season ahead and all that. Happy holidays to you and your family. We'll continue on the other side. We got a big week here of Cincinnati Bengals. You can find Luke, Baltimore Luke, as well as Luke at WNST.net. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from wherever you happen to be. The morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox at 7 a.m. It includes Luke's story on Joe Flacco improving here. So you'll definitely want to go check that out at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month, never any commitment. There's one around the corner from you at PlanetFitness.com. Makes perfect sense to work off the eggnog and all of the cookies and pie. And I'm a particular ice cream fiend at this point too, as well as Malbec and stout beer and hams and casseroles and sauerkraut and kielbasa and all those sort of weird holiday treats. Bengals are in this week. Last but never least, Dennis Kolatzos will be here to christen out 17 and bring in 18 on Thursday. It is the SSV on WNST, heard on Thursdays from 3 until 5. And, of course, Manny Machado's not getting traded now, so there will be no WNST text on that. So, but if you're on the text service, you know how good it is. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis is here on Thursday. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel as we pull down the shades on 17 and get ready for Festivus in 18 if we can win this week. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.